Okay, having done 13 and 14, let's go on to do a couple more that may be a little bit more complicated, which is fine. Okay, we're going to do number 19 and number 20 next. All right, number 19 and number 20 next. Number 19, y equals 5/3 sine of negative 2 pi over 3x. And number 20, y equals 9/5 cosine of negative 3 pi over 2x. Okay. As always, let's identify the period and the amplitude first. So here, our amplitude, 5/3. Our period is 2 pi divided by 2 pi over 3, right? We don't care about the negative here. I'm not going to have a negative period, right? So 2 pi divided by 2 pi over 3, which is equal to 3. While for this cosine graph, our amplitude, 9/5, and our period is 2 pi divided by 3 pi over 2. Right? Well, 2 pi divided by 3 pi over 2 is the same thing as 2 pi times 2 over 3 pi. And if I look at that, that's going to give me 4/3. Okay, so amplitude 5/3, sine function, period 3, amplitude 9/5, cosine function, period 4/3. Alright, if I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw my graph, I might draw the graph so I have positive and negative, which is fine. Okay, so I have a sine function, a period of 3, so I know that at 1/2 of my period, 1.5, and at the end of my period, my sine function is on that central axis. And I know I have the same thing in that opposite direction, so negative 1.5, negative 3. There we are. My amplitude is 5/3. There is no vertical translation, right? So negative 5/3 down here, positive 5/3 up there. Okay, and I know that sine function starting at 0 will go up to a maximum first, so up to a maximum and then down to a minimum. Going backwards, minimum, maximum. Right? So if I were to come in here and play connect the dots, there is my graph. Okay. Notice that this graph has odd symmetry. I am a sine function that goes through the origin. I'm going to have odd symmetry. Right? What does that mean? All it means is that if I turn this graph upside down, you really can't tell much of a difference between what this graph looks like and that graph. They look the same. Okay? Odd symmetry, important to understand that f of negative x equals negative f of x. Right? That if I had f of negative 1, it would be negative f of 1. Whatever that value happens to be. Okay? Very important. And for number 20, we have our information. We can set up to draw our graph. And once again, we could simply come over here to draw, right, two periods, but doing part negative, part positive. Okay, our period is 4/3. It's a strange period, but we can still draw it fairly simple. Right, half the period, full period. 4/3, so that's 2/3. Half the period, full period. Negative 2/3, negative 4/3. Okay. No horizontal translation, right? Vertical translation, we're fine, right? So I have 9/5 as my amplitude. So up here, 9/5, down here, negative 9/5. Okay. Cosine, positive, starts at a maximum, and then at the end of the period, maximum. Right? At the end of the period, maximum. Halfway between, minimum. Halfway between, minimum. Right? And then I know that halfway between a max and a min, I'm going to be on the axis. Halfway between a max and a min on the axis. negative 1/3, and that would be negative 3/3. And of course, we know that 3/3 is 1, and negative 3/3 is negative 1. Right? And I can come in here and draw my graph. So here I go, drawing the graph. Here it goes, drawing the graph. And notice that for the cosine function, I have even symmetry. Right? I have symmetry across the y-axis, right? This side of the graph looks the same as that side of the graph, right? This is Santa's reindeer's graph, right? You can see the reindeer over here. You can see the reindeer over here. Your antlers, your eyes, and your nose, right? This one might just be Donner and Blitzen. No Rudolph here, no red nose. But even symmetry, f of negative x equals f of x. That means f of negative 1 would be the exact same thing as f of positive 1. Okay? Very important that we can draw out the graphs correctly, and very important that we start to understand how to go from the graphs back to the equations. Okay? Make sure you get the practice. We'll have a little bit more time to practice, and then in the upcoming classes we'll have our